Welcome, everybody, to Agenda Dad. As a quick overview, in the last segment of Agenda Dad, which kicked off in September, we were looking particularly at the policy around paternal perinatal mental health screening. Say that 5 times. Um, and um, and through that journey, we were speaking with Mark Williams, Dr. Mark Cobain, and Dan Flanagan, and we were looking at the aspects of mental and physical health outcomes for fathers in the UK. And all of that material is on the website at Future Men for you to pick up on. It's also on our YouTube channel if you want to have a look over that. Lots of great information was shared. In this segment, we're going to be talking about paternity leave. And as a quick introduction to this, some of you who may have signed up for the petition that was mounted by Fatherhood Institute to call on the government to review paternity leave with a view to extending it to 6 weeks at 90% pay may have received an email this morning saying that the government has decided not to press forward with that. And one of the statements within that email was that there is the option to choose shared parental leave for those who really wanted to extend their time with their children, support their partners, and I suppose like at a society level, model caring and nurturing within the breadth of what masculinity can be, rather than just a narrow band of provider protector. That last segment about the social implications is much more my interpretation, but I don't think I'm the only one who holds that thought. So that is a broad segue into introducing Ian Dinwiddy, who's going to talk about shared parental leave. And what we would really like is anybody who has any questions or any comments, if there's any information that you are aware of that can support this agenda around paternity leave, please do share everything through the chat. That would be great. So Ian, over to you. And actually, before you come in, Ian and I, we have had parallel lives for the best part of 25, 26 years. We went to the same university. We knew very many of the same people. And then when we met, what was it, maybe a couple of years, no, a year ago or something like that. We were going through our Rolodex of how do you know this person? And then it was like, wait a minute, we have clearly occupied the same space at the same time on many occasions.
Yeah.
So Ian, over to you.
We also have daughters with the same fantastic name as well.
Who are the same age.
Exactly. Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me back. Let's just see if I can press all the right buttons in the right order. Okay, perfect. So Agenda Dad. So thank you very much, and for having me back to kind of lead a bit of a conversation, as sort of kickstart a conversation today at lunchtime around shared parental leave in particular, and some of the kind of broader narrative around men taking leave, the opportunities, the challenges that are involved, some of those decision-making processes that both help men to make good decisions and decisions that are good for their families, good for them individually and within their relationships, but also some of the challenges that are involved. And some of, where do we go next with something like shared parental leave? Where do we go next more generally with parental leave? Certainly in terms of the Department of Business and Innovation, I think it is, and not been very innovative in terms of how they look at statutory paternity leave, if the email that Chris was talking about and the one that I got as well is anything to go by. So a little bit about my background. So when I was 11 years old, my mum was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so my brother and I grew up in a household that was very much dominated by things that need to be done by men, domestic activity that in my peer group, my friends, mum would have been doing stuff for them. We needed to do stuff for mum largely and for ourselves. And so very much from early days, a sense of sort of gender equality, I guess, and breaking the narrative of gendered roles within the home. My dad worked really, really flexibly. That isn't actually a picture of the car phone that he had in his car in the bottom left, but it looked a lot like that. And almost certainly he got it from that well-known store called Car Phone Warehouse. And so for the younger people, it must have, what on earth? Why is this? I mean, maybe they don't ask at all. They probably don't ask why it's called Boots or Sainsbury's. I bore the kids on, a lot of these places are it's the founders, just like, well, what are we going to call it? Well, Marks, I'm Marks and you're Spencer. That's the name of our store. Car Phone Warehouse came from car phones, but it was an enabler of flexible work. And so in Somerset in the 1980s, flexible work wasn't something that was easily accessible, but it was something that was really important for dad to support mum and support us as boys growing up. So I'm now the dad of two. So Freya was 14 last week. Struan was 11 the day after. Don't necessarily recommend that as if you're planning in advance having January babies right next to each other. My wife Lisa is a lawyer, and I've seen sort of firsthand some of the challenges around how we perceive women in the workplace, and how we see gender and parenting roles and how that plays out on a larger scale. I was twice a stay-at-home dad with both of my children, and more recently a school-run dad. I've been a coach since 2017, and the bottom right-hand corner is one of our guests from Lockdown Dads podcast. It's coming up on 4 years ago. Then James Miller and I started recording that, and in there is Chris's doppelganger world champion, who is one of our crossover friendships, and what Chris is referring to in terms of circles of people that we know is that someone that we both know at various times during our lives. So things that are important, and some of us are a little bit right background there. So we're going to talk about a number of different aspects today. I'm going to rattle through these fairly quickly. We've got a slide on each of these areas. What is the statutory framework for shared parental leave? What type of businesses, what type of organisation enhance leave? What's uptake actually like? What does the government say uptake's like? There's lots of things in the background. So decision dynamics. How do we approach choosing to take shared parental leave? Choice. Why that uptake matters. Is it a flawed policy? And that leads hopefully into where do we go next? Thinking about beyond policy. Policy only takes us so far. Hopefully that will be part of the conversation during the rest of the hour outside of my own little bit. Okay, statutory framework. There's stuff here that I think a lot of you here will know instinctively. Some of you, it'll be more of a surprise, perhaps, just how unsupportive the statutory framework is in terms of pay. So statutory maternity pay is 90% of average weekly earnings. Paternity leave in comparison is 2 weeks at a much lower rate, 2 weeks of statutory leave. When I first became a dad back in 2010, God, 14, I had to work backwards. When I became a dad in 2010, I thought that parental leave, and this is how naive I was paid full pay. I thought, oh, a couple of weeks to look after your children, that makes sense. It was only when I got my pay slip that I realised that statutory pay was even a thing. And that was how naive I was, and how disappointing that was, and how much it pointed towards how we perceived fathers' roles within the family unit and within caring responsibilities. Shared parental leave, as the government have pointed out very kindly today, not for the first time, this isn't actually a lift from their email today, but it's sharing of pay. But again, the pay rate is at statutory level. Currently £172.48 a week, or 90% of your average earnings. And the kicker, whichever is lower. It's not up, it's always pushed down. So finances are very much part of the conversation and the awareness of the challenges around individual uptake. So enhancing leave. So this is I looked at some of the data that's shared by Bright Horizons and their parental leave and family support benchmark in the UK. So there's 500 organisations who self-selected to respond to this. So of those 500 who are self-selecting to talk about parental leave and family support, and we find that maternity leave is enhanced by 72% this time round of this group of organisations, and then it drops down to 43% on shared parental leave pay. As we'll see in a minute in terms of the numbers, that does not represent what's going on in the country. There are not 43% of businesses more generally are not enhancing shared parental leave. Those numbers will be significantly lower, because if they were enhancing shared parental leave, we would see a lot more individuals taking it up and much more opportunity. And as it is, it's underwhelming, to say the least. Department for Business and Trade, I call them Business, Trade and Innovation. I'm sure they are, actually. I know one stage they changed these names. Last year, they did an evaluation report of shared parental leave. And when we share these slides, obviously there's a link there. You can look at all 163 pages in your own time. But what's important to recognise here is that mothers tend to take, very few mothers take advantage of shared parental leave, which perhaps isn't necessarily surprising. And slightly more employee fathers than mothers were taking it, around about 5%. In terms of absolute numbers, 6,200 individuals were in receipt of shared parental pay during 2015-16, and that had risen to 13,000. So we have really modest numbers. That's HMRC data. Sometimes we see information, you may have seen information, range somewhere between 2 and 5% of eligible couples. Obviously, there are challenges. This is not ring-fenced, and this isn't ring-fenced leave that individuals are entitled to by default. There are eligibility criteria which make it sometimes quite challenging to access, and their eligibility criteria, I think they sit on both sides. So both of the couple have to be eligible in their own organisations potentially. So obviously, we're seeing relatively modest numbers of individuals taking up leave, slightly more men than women. But this is quite striking. This is a quote in terms of shared parental leave. Who takes shared parental leave? And I recognise this really. I'm acutely aware of this, because the work I do with individuals on a coaching basis is very much men who are taking extended shared parental leave, well-paid extended parental leave in large organisations, stable jobs, well paid. They can afford to do these things. We can see here, more likely to be older, more likely to be white, highly qualified, large organisations, higher income, progressive gender role attitudes, more likely to be married. Shared parental leave as in terms of a raw tool for supporting individuals is supporting a relatively small number and a very narrow proportion of the population. That's challenging, because I think the decision dynamics, it's often about pay. We can't take out finances from the equation within individuals. Circumstances are within relationships. Taking leave can be, in inverted commas, really expensive. We know that taking leave has massive upsides, benefits in terms of connection with our children, but also we can't ignore the finances. So that becomes quite challenging. Complexity. Talking to an individual I was coaching session yesterday, who had previously taken some leave at the start when his daughter was born, and now he's going to take another 4 weeks. He's going to take 4 weeks of shared parental leave. So we're doing the paperwork at the moment. It's really hard work. I think we're going to be fine. I think we're going to do it. But this was someone who was already clued into the system and finding it tricky to manage with 2 employers. Thinking about transfer of leave. Typically, shared parental leave gets transferred within a couple. And more often than not, then it's actually a transfer from a birth mother to a father. And that comes with social challenges in terms of men who are opting in to take leave that they're not otherwise necessarily entitled to. That fear of doing things differently, of saying, actually, I'm taking leave that I don't have to take. That creates a signal for it in the workplace that men may be uncomfortable to do, even if they have navigated some of those pay dynamics already. Dual eligibility in terms of that comes into the complexity piece, and also this element around the culture and the line manager. The line manager often, and the culture of an organisation, being in many ways, I think, the gatekeepers for what is seen as allowable within a certain organisation. So we can have brilliant pay policies, we can have brilliant opportunity to do things, we can totally understand the complexity of the system around it. And then we go, yeah, but my boss says, no, it's going to affect my prospects. I'm not going to get promoted. That at the bottom line is something that's really important. And I know from, talking to, the guys that I coach, it comes up almost every single time in the first session, talking about, well, why did you take up this opportunity? What made you take the leave? That's like, it always comes up. My boss is really supportive. Men will volunteer that information. And so it is important that cultural overlay and that line management sort of gatekeeping is that element of being beyond the policy. In many ways, shared parental leave is complicated because we have so much choice. It's brilliant, but we have lots and lots of choice. So I picked up this graphic from Working Families. Again, there's a link along the bottom, so you can go and see where that picks up. But you've got dynamics between birth parent and partner. You can see there's two different scenarios: sharing leave equally. There's a return to work, there's statutory paternity leave, there's unpaid shared parental leave, there's paid shared parental leave, depending on how you split it. There's, in the second scenario, you're taking blocks. You can see how it becomes quite complicated quite quickly. Great for the choice, great for flexibility, which I think is probably a good thing overall, but it does add to the complexity of, okay, are we considering those conversations about, are you considering shared parental leave, maybe aren't necessarily happening early enough in a lot of a lot of men's experiences. It becomes difficult. It almost becomes too hard to navigate. And certainly when the pay dynamics aren't there, then it becomes quite challenging. So you've got a couple of scenarios. That article, Working Families article, if you type in Working Families shared parental leave, you've got an article where they broke down a number of these different ways of doing things. There's quite a lot of detail there. So it's always encourage you to have a look at that as well. But uptake matters. It's really, really important. Lancet report's not the right word, is it? Research. They researched in the Lancet, I believe. They found that postnatal paternity leave improved postnatal depression outcomes versus fathers who didn't take paternity leave. Fatherhood Institute, friends of future men, and certainly friends of mine as well, talking about the behavioural benefits of men who are able to provide early kind of caregiving and frequent contact and quality and quantity time in many ways, engaged with their children. Opportunities to engage is really important. And also something that caught my eye from the all-party parliamentary fatherhood group on fatherhood from last year, when Dr. Anna Jordan presented, and she talked about mothers in traditional arrangements reporting significantly lower well-being and relationship quality than mothers who shared childcare equally. Shared parental leave been a great opportunity for, I think, men to learn skills that we don't necessarily get the opportunity to do otherwise, and break some of that sense around mother knows best. Often in a lot of heterosexual relationships, mother merely has more experience, and that's why mother knows best. But also, I think the uptake of shared parental leave is really, really important, because we do need to break this narrative about men not wanting to get involved, not wanting to take the leave that they're entitled to. And I think it's an easy stick to be beaten with, right? Well, you've got shared parental leave. And so, but men don't take it, therefore men aren't interested. Actually understanding the dynamics of why men don't necessarily feel able to engage with it, the complexity of all those things we talked about, I think is really important. So in many ways, proving what we know here in this room today, that men do want to be involved, just need to work on some of those barriers. I think it's important. And I think in some ways, shared parental leave could actually be seen as damaging for sort of the broader theme around supporting men to be authentic fathers. So is it a flawed policy? I think it's where we start to open up the conversation. I think it's a step in the right direction. We're going back I think it's 9 years. I think next year it'll be 10 years since the policy first came in. For individuals who have the opportunity to access that type of leave, it's a really big thing. But I think too many people are effectively unable to access it. It's largely paid at the statutory rate. It's complicated. You need to opt in. You need to transfer leave from one individual to another. Then there become, even within relationships, there's a dynamic about giving up leave. There's a dynamic about taking leave and how that plays out, certainly in terms of perception in the workplace. And that is challenging as well. So yes, but it's working in the right direction, I think. So where to next? In the UK, I think the gold standard for leave in the UK is equalised full pay in organisations, parental leave 26 weeks, regardless of how you become a parent. It removes some of these clumsy challenges around primary and secondary carer non-birth mothers taking paternity leave because that's the only mechanism for them. Campaigns to equalise paternity leave at 6 weeks have promise. They may have been shot down today by the government. We kind of, I think in many ways, I think anyone who works in this field is not unsurprised by the reaction. You know, hopefully with a change of government, we'll see things move in a different way. But increasing actually statutory paternity leave makes things more affordable for parents, greater choice, and tangible benefits for a much wider range of parents rather than shared parental leave, which is driven by is a very narrow window of opportunity for individuals in particularly privileged circumstances. And I think it brings up the base. When you improve the base, you have organisations going beyond that. I've seen this in Switzerland, for example, where a couple of years ago the Swiss went from 2 weeks of effectively what they called statutory paternity leave to 2 weeks of fully paid leave. Now, for Switzerland to be ahead of the UK is a little bit sad, given that Switzerland is a country where women didn't have the vote until the mid-1970s. However, they are now providing 2 weeks of fully paid paternity leave at full pay. Organisations, I was doing some work around that time with Deloitte in Switzerland, and Deloitte had seen, well, we can't now be the base. So they increased their paternity leave offering to 6 weeks of full pay, directly off a result of government changes in terms of the statutory system. Self-employed, it is one of the big gaps within all of this statutory maternity parental leave and maternity paternity pay, shared parental leave. Self-employed aren't entitled to anything. It's a really massive gap. So when we talk about eligible parents, there's a whole swathe of individuals. I think numbers, there might be people in this group who know more than I do. Something like it's around about 30% of all new dads aren't eligible for any leave under any circumstances as a result of some of these dynamics. And one of the questions that I think is important for organisations to think about is, why are organisations enhancing shared parental leave? And you see some really generous policies, but they're not necessarily aiming for equal parental leave, which would be a simpler system and easier for individuals to access. It's a question that I came up with because I don't know the answer at all on that one, and I need to ask more people. So last little bit, beyond policy, I think it's really important to understand, even with the best policies in the world, the men may not feel necessarily comfortable taking the leave that they're entitled to. So this article, I quote it all the time. It's a really interesting one from a couple of years ago, Paternity Leave, the Hidden Barriers Keeping Men at Work. Sense of fear of being seen as discriminated against. Might not be real, but it's certainly a fear. Missing out on pay rises, promotions, being marginalised, or even mocked as reasons for not taking time off. So understanding that cultural overlay as well. There we go. Oh, pretty much on time as well, Chris.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much, Ian. So much in all of that. And there are some questions and comments in the chat. And without being at all a narcissist, I'm going to prioritize my 2 questions for you.
I was going to say, who's this Chris man? Who's Chris asking?
Exactly.
You asked a good question. Let's ask a good question. Owen has too. I see it.
You mentioned early on about that sort of shocking realization of what statutory paternity pay meant for you. So would you have taken paternity leave if you knew?
Yes. It was for us in our circumstances. I mean, we're very Lisa. Yeah, I don't think did I say today? Yeah, law. Did I talk about law? Yeah, my wife's a lawyer. She's more senior now than she was sort of those years ago. I think it was more a case of it was fine for us. I mean, she was earning good money. She was on 6 months fully paid paternity, obviously, and I would have been more prepared for it. I mean, had our family situation been different, losing whatever we lost there, I don't know what I was on at the time, but losing, say, a couple of £1,000, which I guess was what it probably was at the time, that could have had a real impact on our family finances for that year. Now, you could say that actually it's my naivety. I should have known. I should have read my HR policy, but I just hadn't really thought about it. It didn't matter for me, but for a lot of individuals, not knowing that would become quite a shock, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and you raise a really good point there. When we're thinking about a policy that would stretch across all the multitudes of families that exist in the UK, it should be something that's going to work for the vast majority. I mean, perhaps it's an overextension to say for everyone, but at least the vast majority. And when there are certain circumstances that need to be in place before the policy can really work for the family, then it's not really being effective. Um, we have a question from uh, we'll go with Neil Peters. Good to see you, Neil. Thanks for joining. Um, is shared parental leave available if parents don't live together?
I yes, I think it is. Owen's nodding. I'm looking at my screen. So fortunately, Owen's nodding. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, Owen, you're in a better position to answer this one. I think yes.
I mean, I'm not a employment law, and I've missed the letter that came out this morning, so I'm less well informed than you and Chris. They didn't email me about their decision not to follow up, but yes, through the families we support and the men we support, there is an entitlement. You don't have to be residing within the same household, as my understanding. You just have to present as parents co-parenting, and if you are named as that parent, and you have a right to apply or to share that parental leave. However, the practical dynamics of that get involved. If you are not cohabiting or not in a relationship, the conversations about how you share parental leave become that much harder. You've already kind of touched on yourself in your presentation that it can be difficult when you're in a relationship to sit down with your partner and plan and work out. We need to kind of start factoring and teaching new parents or expectant parents to start having these conversations much earlier in pregnancy or even in the planning of becoming a parent, let alone kind of, oh, the baby's due in a month. What have we done? Because kind of to reflect and not to dominate your presentation, if you're not a large organization, you haven't got a big HR department, someone comes to you and goes, right, I want to make this arrangement for shared blocks of parental leave over a period of time. You know, I know our HR department had to go away and do research and get expert advice about how to apply these rules. So the system is not one that's set up to make life easy for new parents. And if you've got any complications within your dynamic, i.e., you're not cohabiting or you're not married, you're not in the instant agreement about what should happen, it can make the stuff so hard, it's almost to put you off doing it, is what I would say.
Thank you for that insight there, Owen. And really great question, Neil. I think this is so just to step aside for a moment from this presentation and the talk, and just to remind everybody, as I said, this is all being recorded. The chat will be saved and condensed into an online a document that will sit online. So questions like yours, Neil, is something that we can dig into a little bit more iteratively and share all of that over social media and through our website. So great question. Ian, I had another question.
I was trying to find an answer to one of the other ones, but I do know.
In your experience and with the insights from the people that you coach, what adaptations could be made to shared parental leave to increase uptake?
I think one of the first things that's kind of missed out is that the conversations just aren't been had about the opportunity. So we have a MAP B1 that triggers a lot of maternity related access to services and also conversations, and we don't have the same thing for dads. When it's easy for a dad to go through the system, go through work without learning things that they don't know about. I had a conversation to illustrate that. I had a conversation with ExxonMobil down in Fawley in Southampton. I did some live events down there, and I was talking to the HR representative, and they offered 2 weeks of fully paid leave. I said, "How do you know how many dads you've got?" It's like, well, actually, I'm not sure we do know necessarily. And there was a realization actually, if you were taking big sprawling organization, both physically and also in the breadth of what they do, 2 weeks of fully paid leave could just be man going away for 2 weeks and coming back and just getting paid. There was no system for capturing and having conversations. Because shared parental leave is so challenging, I think the number one thing that doesn't cost anything really is to have a is to promote it internally, the opportunities internally within organizations to take leave. You don't need to enhance it for it to be on men's radars at the point where they need to think about it. And actually, for something like shared parental leave, where there's so many different dynamics at play in terms of the decision making, it's not something you can suddenly decide. Yeah, well, you can decide sort of any time in the first year. I think you can share the leave, but it's something that's just not on individuals' radars necessarily. So I think promoting the opportunity largely is probably the first and probably the single cheapest thing to do. Just
Mm. Oh, and I'll come to you in a minute, because I recently came across an incentive that's created in Quebec. And Canada is an interesting space because many of these, like health and social care and families, they operate at a provincial level. So it's almost within like one country you can run organic RCTs, right? Randomized control trials. So in Quebec, they have a system that incentivizes shared parental leave, where if both partners can demonstrate that they take 8 weeks of parental leave, they then have an additional 4 weeks that is tacked on to the overall time with their newborn. So it is one of those potential policy wrinkles that can say, hey, if you do this, then we're going to give you a little bit more on the back end of that. And I thought to myself, that's really interesting. And I do know that from in 2021, they saw the highest uptake, although it wasn't remarkable. I'm going to say that for starters, of shared parental leave. So they moved up to 16% from a starting point of under 5. And it took about 10 years, but they did have this incentive there, and 16% is, it's not everyone, but it's better than where we are. So I just thought I'd share that out there, and I'll share a link to their policy wrinkle in the chat. So I thought I'd share that. Oh, and you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's for a couple of points. One was, you mentioned Quebec, and I was lucky enough last week to be at an event where I met an ambassador from Canada who was actually from the provincial government in Quebec, and was talking a lot about how they've shifted their policies to embrace some of the challenges they face provisionally. Quebec, I didn't know this, but she was being very open and frank, has some challenges around their approaches to equality. We're quite a traditional outpost within Canada themselves, about, whether it be race, sex, gender roles, etc., etc. So they've made an active push recently to move to different forms of government, large town hall forum things, trying to address equalities, and gender inequalities is one of those. So I think that might contribute towards the culture that has led to this incentivizing of these policies that not only benefit from a kind of GDP perspective, productivity, but also from an equalities, looking in the longer term, what's good for the child, what's good for the partner, what's good for the husband, not just what's good for business, and or not just what's good for the exchequer. You have to look at these issues in the round. And for me, shared parental leave isn't just the drive here in the UK. The imperative behind it seems to be about getting people back into the workplace, and making it efficient, rather than the longer term generational view of pushing towards a more fairer and more equal society. So it's, how do we campaign? Do we campaign on both of those things, or do we campaign on one of those things? And I think that the point that I actually originally put my hand up was around Ian's point around corporations and who's accessing these different types of benefits and when. And it speaks a little bit to Denish's point. Maybe Chris, you was going to get that in a minute about what we know Music Football Fatherhood are doing, along with University of Birmingham with their employer awards. And we know from reviewing some of the people who apply for those employer awards around parental leave and paternity leave, that some of the larger organizations with well-funded HR departments who are keen to attract a younger, dynamic workforce are putting a lot of effort into addressing these issues and promoting within their organizations the uptake of parental leave and the additional benefits, the enhancements that they're adding, including non-monetary benefits like the check-in days, access to parental groups or support groups within the organization, all of those kind of benefits to try and equalize pay and equalize their approach to benefits that are non-financial to their staff team. my concern a bit in my comment, which wasn't a question, apologies for the ramble, which is more about like, what is it we want to achieve with this? You know, what is it we're trying to do with shared parental leave or paternity leave in the UK, and what are the drivers? Because it would seem to me, without having read the email, that because the take up hasn't been, since the adjustments were made, huge, they've kind of rode back on it somewhat, the current government. I mean, we're all crossing our fingers and hoping that a new government coming in will change all of that, but I don't see much radical policy making in the first few years of any new government, whoever's in charge. So I suppose it's a call to all of us to say, how do we campaign around this? What's the actual platform, the footing we're campaigning on to say why this should happen?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic call to action. Firstly, to shape out what it is that we're campaigning on, and then to group think about the different dynamics in play and where we can all play a collective role in campaigning potentially along multiple lines. Maybe it's, and then everybody's playing their part to enhance the line that accords most with their organization or individual ethos. Um, Ian, coming back to Dinesh's question there,
Yes.
are you aware of any statistics around what the uptake is from those corporations that are enhancing or delivering equal paternity leave, parental leave?
Yeah, so that's what I've been frantically kind of looking, and I had some slides on this, but I found the original thing. So Aviva, and actually this ties into Charlotte's question about, is it a failed policy? Actually, what you find is that a lot of the enhancements in parental leave and the equalising of parental leave stem in time from shared parental leave. When shared parental leave, before shared parental leave came in, Aviva, who were probably the first to make a radical change in parental leave, they didn't bring that policy in until after shared parental leave. So I think it's important to recognise that shared parental leave in many ways started the process towards extended leave. And obviously we're talking about large corporates. So on the straight from the so 2022, so June 2022, from the Aviva website, which I just managed to find, new data show, and this is a quote from their website, which is reading off the screen here. Aviva's equal parental leave policy has proved to be consistently popular since the company first introduced it. 80% of men at the company have taken at least 5 months out of work when a new child arrives, and 79% of men have taken over 5 months for subsequent births. So over 2,500 colleagues at Aviva in the UK have taken, since 2018, more than once. 131 men taking it twice. So large proportions. Aviva were one of the first employers to introduce equal parental leave policy. So they talk about it a lot. So you're talking about 80% of men who are becoming fathers taking at least 5 months of leave out of the 6 months that are available. So obviously there's a range within that. They're the one that I'm closest to. They're the ones that I've seen more often. So essentially, provided well-paid leave, men will take it. I think it's, especially when it's ring fenced. Obviously, we're avoiding that transfer of leave, and all those dynamics around, what does it mean to transfer leave?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you. And before I come to Catherine Barker's question, which is really quite fantastic, actually, the first question that Catherine raises, which is it's quite circular in its intention. But later on down the line, when we're talking about paternity leave, shared parental leave, a lot of what we're discussing here is quantity, and we're hinting at quality, but we're really fortunate because we're going to have somebody who took a shared parental leave 6 years ago, and he's going to talk to us about the journey that he's been on since then, and how it's impacted positively caring arrangements, bonding, his sense of fatherhood. Because I think, Owen, you and I and Charlotte, we've all talked about this many times. At the moment, there's probably a need to sell this more to fathers. There's almost you're going to lose out in some way. There's an interpretation of this, and actually, it's like, well, wait a minute, no, you're going to gain an awful lot, and that gain, you might lose a little bit of money here in the short run, but you're going to gain a lifetime of a robust and profound relationship with your child over decades. You know, how can you equate this? Money comes and goes, but time is always spent, you know, that kind of idea. So I just wanted to highlight that for people who are on there, and that we will be joined by somebody who had that experience of shared parental leave. So coming to Catherine, the first question, I really love this question. Do organizations such as Institute of Health Visiting support demand for improvements to paternity or parental leave, i.e. those organizations who campaign for pregnancy and early years issues? And Ian, I'm going to give you a little bit more time, because we at Future Men, we've had, and Owen, correct me if I'm wrong, we've had at least 2 members of staff who have taken shared parental leave over extended periods. Is it 2 or is it more?
I would have to check the HR records to find out the exact status of the leave that was taken. But yes, in recent times, at least 2 of our staff have applied and shared with their partners.
Yeah.
And as an addendum to your point, you said we need to sell this policy more to men. We need to sell it more to women as well. We need to just improve awareness across the piece, and across the socioeconomic piece as well, because at the moment, this is a benefit for those who are already in an area where they can kind of afford to do this. Maybe both parents are working, they can share their leave, both of careers. If people are we're in the midst of a cost of living crisis still, and where families are really pressed and pressured, the practical realities of childcare, time at work, time looking after the children, external family members getting involved so we don't have to take up some of our leave and lose the benefits, or insecure employment. Like, these are all the realities. Poverty, we can never really lose focus on poverty or lower income, even if it doesn't reach the poverty threshold. Sorry to go off on a tangent, but
no.
Selling it to women and remembering there are people in lower socioeconomic demographics where almost this conversation to them would seem like a folly.
Yeah, and again, sorry, Ian, I want to come back to your point, but I want to extend a point that the Fatherhood Institute have made many times, which is the uptake of just paternity leave, the 2 weeks, and the scaling of that, whereby they show very clearly that those fathers who are making 60,000 plus, that their uptake is somewhere around 86-87%. For those fathers who are making 20K and less, it falls right down to something like 23%. And you know, there could be an instinct where all of these experiences get grouped into one number. Dads are only taking up paternity leave at this percentage, and then there's a finger wagging exercise, which is like, oh, you need to do better. But actually, they have to think about all of the interests of their family, and perhaps just going out to work is them doing what they need to do. And there's a need for just recognizing the pressures that are on some. Charlotte, can I come to you in a minute? Because I want to have Ian's response to all of this thus far.
Yeah, I think in reference to Catherine's question, I think some organisations do and some organisations don't. So the campaign for 6 weeks of statutory paternity leave that would match the 6 weeks of maternity leave, that campaign that we're talking about in terms of the response that came through today, in terms of petition. So that's supported by Pregnant Then Screwed in particular. But it's also, and Chris, you'll know more about the organisations. The Fatherhood Institute led it, Future Men supported it, but Pregnant Then Screwed in particular, who are, in terms of organisations who are campaigning on pregnancy and early years issues, certainly pregnancy issues, and they would be there. But I think was it Foresight Society as well? Chris or Owen, you will know more of the detail. But in answer to your question, Catherine, yes, a number of very high-profile organisations campaigning for pregnancy in early years do support extending maternity leave.
Yeah. Charlotte, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that someone actually answered Catherine's question, because we were kind of going everywhere, but Ian has now. But also, just to add to what Ian said, that there are lots of organisations that we is in our kind of forum, and several APPGs as well that support improved paternity leave offers, but actually not many of them are speaking in favor of shared parental leave. The focus is very much on separate kind of use it or lose it paid paternity leave.
Thank you for that. Thanks. Catherine, you asked another question. For those organizations and businesses who have increased what they offer, has there been any reporting on the impact of those on those organizations or businesses? And Catherine, just so that for my own benefit and perhaps for Ian, when you talk about, and you can please feel free to come off of mute in order to answer this qualitative question. But when you're talking about the impact on the businesses, are you talking about recruitment, retention, financial impact, productivity? So feel free to come off mute to sort of qualify that, or put some more detail in the chat. But Ian, whilst Catherine is mulling over my qualitative question, please go ahead.
I don't know. So I do know Aviva, who talk about it a lot. So this is starting to go a little bit outside of my area of expertise, I guess. I'm trying to think, reporting on the impact. So it's interesting in terms of conversations I've had about coaching for new dads within organizations. That's often tied into leave. And also there's some organizations question on return on investment. And there'll be, what's the return on the investment? But what you find is that those businesses who have led the way within their peer groups on extending parental leave or equalizing parental leave, and whatever format that looks like, they don't look at it as a return on investment. They look at it as the right thing to do for their organization. They're looking at it for attraction, looking for, in the case of Adobe, who went to 16 weeks of fully paid paternity leave, the individual Ray, who I did a panel event with, who was head of employee benefits, EMA. He said it was about our values as a business. We wanted to be there for the moments that matter, and paternity leave was a moment that mattered. We didn't look at the upside. We just knew it was the right thing to do. So I think actually it's quite challenging, and I've made a note of it, Catherine. I've taken it and copied it in because it's something I want to research personally in terms of the return on investment and who's reporting what. We get some information from Aviva, but we don't necessarily hear it. It's kind of like, this is what we do. This is what we do, and we don't worry about the cost because we can afford to as an organization, but we just think it's the right thing to do. But organizations, they're tending not to, if they get bogged down in return on investment of increasing paternity leave, then they often find there isn't any data because it is ultimately a cost that's hard to then track later on. I think there's more data certainly around female retention as a result of leave, but I don't think the data exists necessarily on this in the same way for paternity, at least not that I've seen. I've asked Jeremy at Fatherhood Institute on a return on investment question back in September, I think, and he said he didn't know of anything that had come out as yet.
From my understanding, and please take what I'm saying as a direction towards further investigation rather than the definitive answer. But if I remember correctly from one of Pregnant and Screwed's presentation, they were saying that extension of paternity leave up to 6 weeks equates to an increase in GDP because of supporting mothers back into work of about 4%. Now, there's a lot I don't know, and I could have that figure wrong, but I think the essential element of this is that supporting fathers to increase their caring role can have a net positive at a GDP level. But I very quickly segue back to what you've said there at Aviva and what Owen has said previously and what is going on in the chat, which I think is a fantastic resource, which is that there's also the aspect of quality. Yes, we have to have an economic rationale for things, and those economic rationales have to relate to the individual, the partnership, the family, their communities, their wider society, the businesses, et cetera, et cetera. But also we have to think much longer term, in terms of the idea that we're actually modeling and transmitting information to next generations that will shape them and how they decide to be when they become parents, and also when they're thinking about who they want to be with when creating a family. There's so much more to this equation than mere short-termism. Not to say that short-termism doesn't have some value. There's many things in this world which are false friends, which you can chase down and actually doesn't actually get you anywhere. But it's important to keep a sight of both sides, or all sides of this, I should say. I just want to highlight what Cara has shared in the chat from Nottingham. I haven't opened the link yet, but very clearly Neil has, and has left a fantastic comment of support. And Owen has also highlighted the resource pack that we produce at Future Men to support fathers. So I urge everyone to have a look at that. There are no further comments or questions in the chat. I don't have any further questions or comments. Does anybody have anything they would like to say on the back of this? And as I said, this has been recorded, it's going to be shared over social media, hooked up to our YouTube channel at Future Men. And as well as the chat, so resources and questions will be shared as well, so that we can further the conversation. Okay, right. So Catherine just said that she had to go and has come back now, but has appreciated this opportunity to talk and discuss shared parental leave. I think, let's come right back to the beginning of all of this, which is that this morning, many of us received an email that the government directed fathers, families, to go towards shared parental leave. And we've had a conversation here about the strengths and weaknesses of that policy, where there are gaps within the policy, what a good policy could do, what the qualitative and quantitative aspects of the policy are. So it's been wonderful, Ian, to have you here and talking about that. I can see some Homer Simpson hands, first from Owen and then from Charlotte.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I second your thanks to Ian for blessing us with his expertise and knowledge again from his unique perspective. I think one practical element of any future campaigning, which I think would be really useful, would be to kind of get some real plain English behind some of these dynamics and the delineations between the different types of leave we're talking about, so that your average voting person in a very pertinent year has got some opinion around it. And I think reminded us all about the difference between ring fencing certain elements, the use it or lose it bit, the arrangements for employers, and the threshold at which kind of both of the eligibility criteria kick in really needs to be explained a lot more thoroughly, not just to employers or expectant parents, but just to everyone. We need to have a broader debate. We need to understand how this paternity or shared paternal leave discussion then also feeds into the discussion around the high cost of early years childcare as well. I think there needs to be some sort of strategic linking up and simplifying of this discussion so that we can make it accessible for the majority of people who will become parents in this country or going to have their second or third child, and this is still an issue for them. I think that's the only point I wanted to really make, really.
Thanks, Owen. Thank you. And Charlotte.
Sorry, thank you, Chris, and thanks for your presentation, Ian. It's sort of related point really, which is that you've talked, Ian, about kind of selling this to dads and to mums, but there's also quite a bit of evidence that some companies quite cynically actually kind of refuse to engage with employees about this piece of legislation and about their own policies. And I think that's probably one of the main obstacles. It's not just as Owen says, there's a kind of interpretive difficulty around it, but also there is just a kind of cynical kind of blocking of it as well by some companies who don't know how to manage it, or can't afford it, or can't afford to lose that member of staff, or so how do you deal with that?
I think I think understanding your rights and reaching out to organisations that support that. I came up with a conversation recently with a man who was taking paternity leave, whereas shared parental leave and maternity leave, because they can be taken by females, you're protected under the new legislation in terms from redundancy. And the individual in this case had discovered that his paternity leave measure wasn't protected in law. It was only shared parental leave and maternity leave that was protected from redundancy. And see, he got advice. He checked in and got advice from Pregnant Then Screwed through their helpline. So I think it does require, and this is where it becomes difficult, where you don't have agency and understanding. It's very easy to be defeated by the system. And I don't, for individuals facing that, I think it's difficult to know. I guess it's signposting things like I've had a little look at the Nottingham example, signposting resources and where to go for help. But it's helping men. It's tricky. I think it's tricky to find men at the moment when they really need the help and the help to navigate it. And the more, I think, collectively, the more we talk about it, the better it gets. But inconsistencies around that's new government policy, but it doesn't protect men on paternity leave from redundancy. It does protect shared parental leave. He said, well, the irony is, if I'd taken shared parental leave, I'd be protected. He survived the redundancy process. He got the role that he really wanted. So a really positive outcome from him on an individual basis. But he was massively frustrated, and he had the ability, the understanding, and the resources to be able to investigate it. So I think it's a really important point, Charlotte, and I'm not sure I necessarily know the answer, other than we keep pushing resources out there in everywhere where men are and where men might see it.
Fantastic. Well, Ian, on behalf of everybody here, thank you again for joining us. Having just come from another virtual event that you were hosting, now to here, are you doing another old school Mike TV presentation somewhere else? Are you going to jump to another, pixelated space?
I might jump to my lunch.
Oh.
My protein bar at 12 at 11:45 was, I'm a big lad, as you know. I need fueling. I'm going to be refueling. And then I'm umpiring my daughter's hockey match. I was like, well, I'm going to go watch anyway, so I'll go, and it's a school match. She's like, I can go and umpire. So yeah, that's this afternoon's fun.
Fantastic.
But thank you very much for inviting me again.
Oh, our pleasure, Ian, as always. Thank you to everybody who joined. Great to see you all. Next week, we are having Jeremy Davis from the Fatherhood Institute, who will be talking about statutory paternity leave. I'm not going to preempt what his emotional space will be on the back of the message received today, but maybe I just did. I hope to see you all there. Thank you very much again. Take care.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Charlotte.